This video is one part of my longer full video for the Halo Season 2 review. The link will be in the description if you'd rather watch the full video. Thanks. Halo Season 2 is one of the most poorly written things I've ever actually sat through on television. I'm going to be discussing the show on its own merits and only reference the lore as a demonstration of how they pulled random things from it and more often than not made it worse because they don't understand it or they don't care. As far as the show goes, the plot is broken on fundamental levels. The world building is all over the place and completely eviscerated. The characters are stupid a majority of the time for the story to happen. They're unlikable, they're inconsistent. I like to say that these inconsistent characters have what I call Kylo Ren syndrome, where they pretty much just behave however they're needed to for the scene, with no real through line for the season, or their character, or their behavior and decisions. For this video, I'm going to go through my few positives, and then I'm going to go through the plot and how insane it is when you hear it all back to back. I think a lot of people overlook stuff when you just watch it once a week. I'm going to put timestamps all throughout the descriptions because this is going to be a pretty lengthy video. So if there's one particular thing you're interested in, you can just click to it. My positives for this season are Joseph Morgan. He's a very good actor that they completely wasted on an idiot character. The visuals for how low the budget are when they actually do show stuff are okay. The Spartan armor looks good. Most of the acting is good. I think Perez and Ackerson in particular are probably the best. And I think every plotline, character-wise at least, had the bare bones of a good idea, but the execution and logistics are just a nightmare. So those are my positives for this season. Alright, so let's get into the plot. The way that I'm going to do this, because the show jumps around so much each episode, is focus on the main plot threads by character. So for example, I'll cover John's plot line, then Ackerson's, then Parangoski's, then Kai's or Soren's or whoever. And that way it should be a little bit easier to follow, because the show jumps back and forth from plot line to plot line. Probably less than 5 minutes every episode, and it really muddies it up. Alright, let's start with episode 1, and this is the one where all the normies are given false hope based on what they heard before the season came out in the trailer.
First time.
Let's start with Master Cheeks. To start the show, we see Cortana being brain drained magically from Jimmy Halo. I'm not a huge fan of throwaway lines, but it would have been nice to see this addressed. A simple line like, "Hey Cortana, we developed a chip that you can transfer yourself to. Transfer yourself to this chip since he's dead so we can bring him back." But we get nothing. I mean, that might have actually required some effort. Just to be clear, he literally dies and gets hit like 50 feet with a gravity hammer, and then goes on to fight for however many minutes, plus however long it took to get medical attention, and somehow they just resurrected him because he's Jesus Rings. And then we go straight to Sanctuary, where the Spartans, literally the most valuable resource in the UNSC, are helping civilians evacuate outer colonies and get to Pelicans, because obviously no one else could do that. And for the Halo copers that want to make arguments like, oh, well, they don't actually trust the unpelleted Spartans, they try to kill them later this season. There's supposedly a Covenant war raging across the galaxy right now.
Were it not for the Arbiter's Council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
Worst case, they die, and that gets rid of the problem while taking out a shitload of Covenant. But instead, they had to be moronic about it. There's a really funny little scene in here where Cheeks says that he'll go get the Marines, and the guy says no, and someone else has to complain before Chief can go. For the rest of the season, he pretty much tells Admiral Ackerson to suck his dick half the time that he talks to him. This show's military hierarchy is just non-existent. Then, against all military tactics and common sense, and because the story needs it, even though this is a babysitting trip according to Vanek, Jeremy goes alone to where the team is missing that they need to find. Vanek makes an Ibex joke because he likes animals. We get the "We Have Halo Music at Home" soundtrack, and he goes into the fog where there's magically no communication. The dialogue is so shit, it's unreal. Vanek is like, "If you don't come back now, you won't make it." And Master Queef says, "Don't wait up," like some generic 80s action hero.
Le who? The her.
As if this makes any sense. Is this a super important time-pressed evac, or is it babysitting? Is this a military operation, or is everyone just doing whatever they want regardless of how much sense it makes? We also get a nice jump start to Quan's magically retarded plotline, where the magic old lady doesn't want to leave the planet. We see people talk to her who aren't Quan, so she is real, and the planet gets glassed, and she just keeps reappearing. Oh, we also get no explanation for her. She just references planets 42 years ago and mystical shit, and we're supposed to take this entire plotline seriously. And then because no one has radar, or friend or foe tags, or eyes, the comms team shoots at him poorly, and this is where we meet the real hero of the story, Perez. Suddenly, motion detectors, radar, and flashlights don't exist, so the Covenant picks off the comms team like it's a shitty horror movie. Tribal leader Josiah knows the aliens are close by because of the smell. 500 years in the future, we're relying on smell to detect enemies that are right next to you.
I'll point it at Jupiter.
We get a little bit of decent choreography here of him messing up some elites. Thank Christ they aren't sentient and they just attack one at a time and with no guns. It's a really good thing they're not a super advanced alien species that wants to genocide all the humans. And the only one who successfully attacks him runs up with no weapon and just grabs him for a suplex. If the elite had a sword, Cheeks would have been skewered like one of P. Diddy's rappers. Luckily for us all, Perez is the lone survivor, so she can have the most retarded shoehorned plotline I've ever seen. Here's where we get the reveal that they're actually surrounded by dozens of Covenant. You know, the Lord of the Glutes, who they know is a blessed one, who they call a demon. Yeah, him. They just surround him in crazy numbers and then let him walk away because it looks cool. They take turns lighting their swords one at a time. You'd think they were at a fucking concert.
The answer.
And we find out that his girlfriend, Makee, is alive. Presumably because they didn't have any money, so they brought her back for another season. How'd she live after getting shot in the chest? You know, off-screen, as all important things are. So then the planet just suddenly starts getting glassed. I guess the Covenant ships just showed up out of nowhere, or they waited till the absolute last second to risk the Spartans' lives and the soldiers' lives. And you know, this really important evac that you're sending all these resources to try to save civilians. Fuck it. Just don't use radar. Don't look up and see ships in space. Don't have a real escape plan. Just use some condors and ask people nicely to leave. Hang out and get glassed. Fuck it. They go back and meet with Keyes, and he says everything in the outer colonies is getting glassed, including Madrigal. Unfortunately for us all, Quan wasn't there. Then we get one of the dumbest lines of dialogue I've seen in the entire show. Ackerson gets introduced, and John is alone, insisting that the Covenant invaded before they glassed to, quote, practice invasions of a planet.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
What does this mean? An alien force called the Covenant that has existed for millennia, that was literally formed by conquering other species, doesn't know how to perform a ground invasion, so they have to practice? Okay. I mean, what are we doing here? Oh, goodness. Ackerson talks about Halsey and uses was instead of is, implying that she's dead. So you know right away he's evil. And for some reason, none of the Spartans realize he's their boss, so they don't bother saluting, they don't call him sir. They're just kind of dicks to him. I guess Ackerson thought he was on that undercover boss show and thought it'd be fun just to pop into a meeting. Perez's plotline is tied to Cheeks at first, so I'm just going to lump them together. Perez gets credit for what Jason Eclipse did while they were simultaneously using King of Posterior's image as propaganda all over the military and television. Why give the guy that you want to be an icon and unkillable legend credit for the shit that he's actually done? Makes sense to not do it. Jude Sphere storms into a meeting and confronts Ackerson completely inappropriately. He goes and talks to Admiral Parangoski, who's gone undercover for literally zero reason, when she can order anyone to do anything. She's the most powerful person in Oni, and she's pretending to be undercover just because.
But I don't want to be a pirate!
She could have John held in a cell. She could have him tortured or shipped off to wherever he'd be useful. This is all so incredibly retarded, I don't know how she got made Admiral. And then we get this weird scene where I'm not even sure what the point is, of Jason Oblong hanging out in virtual strip clubs, reminiscing about Cortana, where he's apparently a regular. Him and Cortana hated each other in season 1, and now he misses her, but it doesn't really come up again this season until she can magically operate an entire UNSC base on Onyx from a Covenant ship system. And that's it for him and Perez for episode 1. Let's go over Kai and Vanek's brief introduction in this episode. Kai and Vanek are pretty briefly introduced this episode. We don't see much of them. We get wonderful exposition conversation between the two, where she asks very specifically how he feels since he removed his pellet 3 weeks ago. The show thinks it's really clever that his personality is, "Durr, I like animals." He's like the fucking water boy in Mjolnir. These are the same type of shallow cunts that think the color or type of your genitalia or where you stick them is a personality trait. Absolute fucking losers. But that's really it for these two for episode 1. Let's go on to Ackerson and Parangoski for episode 1. So I already briefly touched on it, but Parangoski's plotline is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. And I'm including like Supernatural, where people go in and out of hell like there's just an elevator down to it. I have no idea how people thought this was clever. I have no idea how all the writers thought this was a good idea. In this scene, Ackerson begins the process of gaslighting John into thinking that he's crazy because he had Cortana fill his body and then brain drained. The plan here, just so we're clear, is for Parangoski, the most powerful person in Oni, which she says herself later, is to have Ackerson lie to Chief, try to drive him crazy, so that when they need the Spartans later, him and his team are dead, along with the other Spartan 2s.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
They let him go hang out at AI strip clubs. They don't arrest him. They let him meet face-to-face with Parangoski, quote-unquote undercover, and just walk away. They give him free reign when they suddenly decide they want their most valuable resource dead. Absolute stupidity. That's the main points of Ackerson and Parangoski in episode 1. Let's move on to Soren, whose entire plotline is just a waste of time this season. Soren's plotline starts about 20 minutes into the episode after we get plenty of Jebediah in his armor. We're back to the place that everyone totally cares about and wanted to see again, the rubble. Soren and Laera, his wife, are watching the refugees come in, and after they hold a public cringe fest, they take some in as indentured servants, but for some reason they prefer criminals over normal people. And Fat Dave Chappelle, being the Pirate King, falls for one of the dumbest traps ever and is deceived by a leprechaun who actually works for the UNSC, so we can ensure that bad bitch Laera is in charge. We get this dumbass stuff where Soren suddenly wants to be a Spartan again, even though he's happy in season 1 and has a family. That's what this episode sets up for those two. And the last one for episode 1 is Kwan. Right now she's in her Obi-Wan Kenobi mode, but soon here she'll be in Kwan Wick mode. And she's not actually in this episode except for this last part, but her retarded ass arc started with the old lady that we see that's magical in Sanctuary. We know that she's real because she talks to Marines and Chief, and the episode ends with Obi-Kwan narrating. Everyone's favorite character, who everyone totally wanted back, and is made even more important now.
Why do you do it?
This is jumping ahead, but it's funny because her existence, along with about a dozen contrivances, is what allows the Flood to come back. She's also somehow so close that she's hanging out with Kessler, and it almost seems like she's in a part of their house, but she's also an indentured servant somewhere. Make of that what you will. Let's get into episode 2. This is where people figure out what the show actually is. Shit. I'm going to start with Halsey and Ackerson for this one, because not much happens with them character-wise or plot-wise, even though they take up a lot of screen time. This episode sets up Halsey's plot, which is just kind of whatever convenience the show needs to happen. She doesn't actually do much. She just kind of moves from place to place. And this also confirms Ackerson is a total psychopath because he keeps creating flash clones of his dead sister, who was taken by the Spartan 2 program, and sending them in to torment Halsey. I'm not sure why the UNSC is funding this. I'm not sure why he'd ever be allowed to get to this level of knowing his sister was in the Spartan 2 program. I'm not sure why, even if he is an admiral, he'd have access to that information. We also find out that he knows where Cortana has been sealed away. This is the type of shit that makes Ackerson completely evil and ruins his entire arc when the show wants you to think later on, oh, he's not really that bad. It was actually Parangoski who's evil. Again, no idea whose decision this was to make him completely evil the first 4 episodes and then try to give him a redemption. Later on in the episode, Ackerson meets with Crazy Eyes Kai, and this is where he continues his evil arc, and we start her arc where she's a completely useless leader.
It was simply a matter of outsmarting them. I sent wave after wave of my own men at them until they reached their limit and shut down.
Kai's arc after this point is get mad at John for lying and then leave the Spartan 3 program for like 2 weeks after Reach falls. But she doesn't actually train the Spartan 3s, they just train the simulator. And then when push comes to shove, she chooses them over her lifelong friend and Spartan, Jonah Revolution. Another terrible arc. With Halsey and Ackerson and Kai out of the way, let's move on to our main man. After throwing a tantrum, Jack Hoop threatens to go above Ackerson's head, and he says, "I am the ONI," like he's a shittier version of Palpatine, and again reinforces that he is evil, so that his redemption arc makes no sense. This is also where we get the arc of being more than just the Mjolnir armor, before he proceeds to get his ass kicked in every fight for the rest of the season, until he has his armor. Kai reminds him that she shot Maki herself, and Maki is dead. Julian Sphere is being a total dick to Riz in training because the war that has presumably been going on for years, possibly decades, is now a serious issue. It wasn't before though. And then for whatever reason, Jesse Circlet has access to everything as part of the plan to drive him crazy and let him interfere with stuff. Again, instead of just arresting him or executing him so that he gets pissed off about Cobalt Team. As is appropriate for all coworkers, Baron Buttocks goes to visit Perez at her house completely inappropriately, and her ludicrous arc really begins. To be clear, her arc is comm specialist, PTSD soldier, Sangheili translator, family killed PTSD soldier, kind of attached to John in a maybe romantic way, pilot who leaves Keyes to sacrifice himself instead of doing it herself, the best Spartan 3 in a week, and then guilt-tripping Monarch rear end into saving her and Kai instead of going to Halo, and she survives.
He is the chosen one.
Her and Quan are the self-insert characters. Speaking of, let's go back to Quan Wick, or we have Lucy Liu at Home's plotline. She's an indentured servant who somehow gets to hang out with Kessler. Thank Christ there isn't sophisticated technology in this world, and they use ear tags like they're cattle, so she just rips it out when she needs to. I'm calling her Quan Wick because she just kills multiple bounty hunters off by herself. This shit is insane. There's not much to say about Dave Chappelle in this one. He gets taken, and Laera gets betrayed by the other pirates who want the Black Pearl. And I saved the worst for last, which is Riz. This shitty and short arc for her starts now, where she's injured somehow 6 months later. A plasma grenade that she survived is more of an issue than Jasper Disc being literally fucking brain dead. Not to mention she was wearing armor, which we've seen at this point is pretty much indestructible in magic and can survive 2 ships colliding at the end of the season. Riz is training while injured, which apparently we have no technology for or doctors to detect injuries and whether or not she's actually fit for duty. At this point, she goes and talks to gay ginger Stevie Wonder and has a midlife crisis. Don't worry, this arc doesn't actually go anywhere. I guess her biological clock that Spartans don't have is ticking, because soon she decides, fuck being a Spartan, I want to raise some kids. Riz goes and meets with the retired Spartan Daredevil, and in a horrific display of world building, we find out that he just went blind. 500 years in the future where they created superhumans and have interstellar technology. Can't replace eyes. She gets some ancient Chinese treatment and a little bit of believe in yourself magic, and I guess she's healing.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
The episode ends when we get more confirmation that the show is both poor and retarded, when a military guy sends in groups of 4 to die in the dark, and everyone's second favorite character behind Obi-Kwan, McKee, aka Doc Brown, shows up.
Great Scott!
And that's episode 2. Moving on to episode 3. This is the episode where we get to the drama that you should have saved for your mama. Let's start with our store brand John Halo. Monarch Heine takes his team on an illegal mission until he runs into Megan Rapinoe and she shuts him down. Why is she such an evil cunt?
Don't know.
Does she have an arc or some kind of crazy death? Nah, she's just there to be an asshole. Prince Buns goes back to base and the Wish version of Sergeant Johnson puts him in timeout. They were already in timeout, and thank God the UNSC doesn't have prison cells or executions or any other way to limit what people do, so nothing actually changes except he pouts more. Thank God he's a superhuman and beats up the only 2 guys they sent to escort him and escapes the most important military base we have with no resistance. And a little bit later on, he figures out Parangoski's still with Oni. Why is she undercover? Because she wanted to LARP a little bit, I guess. I don't know. Jackson Perimeter once again visits Perez in her home, once again stalking her, totally appropriate, and it completely makes sense that the UNSC who wants him dead and thinks he's out of control would just allow this behavior to continue. And that's pretty much it for him this episode. Let's move on to Kai. Kai also has a really short part this episode. She believed in the Cheeks, but now she's on board with Ackerson because she wants to steal Kurt's job from the book Ghost of Onyx. But she doesn't actually do the job. She just kind of exists there for a couple weeks. So that's it for her. Let's move on to Ackerson for episode 3. We're supposed to feel bad for Ackerson because his dad has dementia, but he's evil as fuck and they're about to abandon Reach. So
Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
I guess this works to make you sad if you also have dementia and forget how evil he is to the Spartans and everybody else. In a vacuum, the scene's fine. It does nothing for me here because he's already been too much of a dick. Cobalt gets an off-screen death. They were kind of ass clowns though.
Suck big ass cream.
So who really cares? And they had like 30 seconds of screen time. It turns out that the Cheeks were clapping. He was right. So Keyes tells Ackerson to fuck himself because they're about to abandon Reach. Just to be clear about the UNSC's plan. The plan here is to abandon Reach, all of its people, the most important military base they have, Cortana, one of the Forerunner artifacts. They deliberately want to kill the Spartan 2s. And all of this is in the hope that maybe one of the Spartan 3s, which are just inexperienced soldiers in white armor, can put a spike in a Covenant ship and take out a bunch of their ships or a solar system. They have to hope that Cortana gets taken but not destroyed and can still communicate what will hopefully be useful information that will somehow lead to victory. This is the master plan of the UNSC.
fucking retarded? The hell's the matter with you?
I already mentioned this, but we get more of the undercover Admiral Curry shit where she tells John go back to the military instead of, literally fucking ordering him to do it or having him arrested. We go back to Ackerson and Halsey, where really they both just reinforce that they're evil as shit and they're trying to psychologically torture each other, and then Ackerson gives her to Soren. As part of his redemption arc. Makes sense. Ackerson goes and tells his dad to kill himself as he abandons him. Let's go to Layera for episode 3, since she has a ridiculous amount of screen time and steals all of Soren's agency throughout the season. So from season 1 to 2, she practically evolves like a Pokemon, from Trophy Wife into Yas Queen Slayer. She tries to fly away with her, Kessler, and Quan because the crew betrays her, and she gets caught, but manages to beat up 3 people at once somehow, giving time for Kessler to escape. Layera gives Kessler over to Obi-Quan Wick, who's the worst babysitter ever, and ships him off to become a child soldier. This actually works out, because fortunately, this puts everyone on Onyx, because Kessler's going to become a Spartan 3, so that all of our characters can meet up again later in the season. Layera is about to get killed, but then we get James Bond levels of monologuing, while Quan Wick lures the entire crew, literally one by one, into the area where she's at, like a broken video game, killing them all, and as is tradition for the show, it's all off screen. And that's it for them for this episode. And again, last and least, we'll go to Riz. Riz goes to dinner with Fat Daredevil and his husband, and this makes her quit being a Spartan apparently, because we get nothing else from this arc. I guess if people were just a little bit mean to the Spartans and they got one good meal, it would lead to having no more Spartans. Who knew? On to episode 4, The Fall of Reach. You've all been looking forward to it and believing it will be the epic second half of the season.
I was just fucking with him right there,
It's really the fall of a few thousand people in a couple suburbs and a forfeiture of all military assets, like you lost in Monopoly or something, since they didn't really care to fight, and instead of attacking like a scientifically advanced alien force, they attack like terrorists with human bombs spread throughout the city. We'll start with Mr. Cheeks again for this one. Joseph Round and his side piece Perez run through the city, and he fights a Sangheili one-on-one, showing that he doesn't even need the armor, it's just for decoration. Perez cries a bunch about having no training, which turns him on, but in a week, she'll be the best Spartan 3, which is apparently Ackerson's life work. He probably would have had a more impressive life's work if he had just killed himself. They take a little break after he beats up that one elite to go have a quickie in an old thrift shop and to increase the runtime. But hey, we see an Xbox. So all the Halo show simps and possibly bots can go, my god, they put an OG Xbox in the background. I told you guys they love Halo in the games. They also talk about a quarter, which is a pull from the book Fall of Reach, but this show decides to beat it to death and make the quarter symbolic of everything that he does. And this episode can actually be pretty summed up in a bunch of really poorly choreographed fighting with no one in armor, where Daredevil wields a grenade launcher like he actually has sight, his doctor husband dies on the battlefield, so dramatic, and poor gay-blind Spartan decides to walk into a wraith that they could only afford to show for a couple seconds with a bunch of grenades in his hand as a suicide bomber. Jaden Parabola goes on to headquarters and finds out that Ackerson stole their armor, so he doesn't get to become the superhero Tyrant Bums yet. Keyes gives a speech worthy of We Have Sergeant Johnson at Home, and only black significant characters die in this episode, along with the 2 gay ones. It's like they're trying to whittle down their representation. Perez is salty that she gets dumped, and Clapping Cheeks throws a quarter at her and says it wasn't even worth that much, skank. One of the only logical things that Cheeks says in the show, and he almost acts like John Halo instead of Jimmy Rings, is that Keyes is an admiral and shouldn't be sacrificing himself. But then Keyes explains that they ran out of money for the budget, so he has to die. Thanks to a series of huge coincidences, all our main characters are reunited in a single hallway because the Fall of Reach has a huge scope of one tiny city and a hallway. After like 15 minutes of uncompelling fighting, Keyes gets a death worthy of this show, which is to say absolute shit. Perez, flies off and magically ends up at Onyx as a Spartan 3. How? Who cares? That's the beauty of off-screen. You can just do whatever you want without worrying about pesky things like logic. Jake Curlicue gets fucked in a fight by the Arbiter, but McKee is like, no, I need the Spartan D again. Instead of taking him hostage, they leave him there screaming, no, when Vanek dies because he gets stabbed in the chest with a needle from a needler. It's about as funny as Darth Vader's no at the end of episode 3. And the way that Vanek died with this weird needler around, I guess the needler realized it was time for a dramatic death, so it just chilled until it needed to explode at the right time. That's it for him on this one. Let's move on to Halsey and Soren because they're the other plot line. Halsey and Soren talk, but nothing really matters about their conversation. It's not interesting. What actually matters is that they observe Cortana getting stolen while not dying themselves miraculously. And now that I think about it, the Arbiter definitely has a negative KD due to betrayals when this season ends. Either way, this allows all of our characters to have the huge convenience of all ending up in one place. Halsey and Soren are mainly on a little date of their own because he has a thing for blonde MILFs. They wander through the base as literally the only people there. McKee somehow knows how to take Cortana, who's in a chip now. And the Arbiter lets Halsey and Soren finish their date unscathed. Eventually they're able to see Keyes die, and we get that shitty fight to end the episode. So that was The Fall of Reach. On to episode 5. If you remember episode 5 at all, this was the Snooze Fest episode, and also the longest episode of the season. Let's start this one off talking about Jim Bob Rangs. He's been shot with a plasma pistol, just chilling with Soren. They take down the one brute we see this season. And because women rule everything, Laera and the Chosen Quan show up to this exact hallway because they read the script and knew they needed to avoid the Covenant fleet and come straight here just in the nick of time.
Don't worry. Girls get it done.
Quan gets a Rambo shot of her using a turret, but rescues them all until Riz decides, wait, I forgot. My nickname is Retard Riz. So she goes back for Vanek's body because Spartans are sentimental in this show. Then she gets shot and goes into a coma. Zar Keister wakes up from his coma and wants revenge. You know, on the UNSC instead of fighting the Covenant, because it turns out that without his armor, he's actually a loser. Kind of destroys the whole arc they were setting up for the first couple episodes. This whole episode for Jake Curvature is pretty much him supposedly discovering his humanity, but it's all forced by the Chosen Quan, and nothing really comes of it, except Vanek's body gets burned. He's pretty much the complete same after this episode. Halsey explains to him, but primarily the audience, that what happened on Reach wasn't strategic, it was political. Glad she can make it clear to the audience what the UNSC priorities are. And the majority of the rest of the episode is Jonas Horseshoe having feelings, which he's had literally since episode 2 of season 1. I guess everyone's supposed to forget that he was screaming at people and tried to punch Halsey and grabbed like a homeless crazy looking guy and was like, what am I? Halsey performed surgery on Riz to turn her into Forrest Gump, but says that she can still be a Spartan if she tries hard enough. Let's move on to the Chosen Quan. This is the episode where she evolves from Quan Wick into the Chosen Quan. This also confirms that she's maybe the most important character to the plot. Thank God she became an indentured servant in Kessler's closet and happened to need to go to Reach, where they happened to escape to Onyx, and she happened to fall into a well that was the Forerunner well, where only she could figure out the space puzzle, and that puzzle happened to unleash the Flood. Wonderful writing. Yeah, that's kind of it for her this episode. She helps John open up about his feelings, and we're confirmed now that she's just magic. Moving on to Soren and Laera. They're on their pursuit for Kessler, and this show does something really impressive, which is create a child that the audience doesn't care about whether or not you find him.
Impressive. Most impressive.
So they're on Illyria. They talk to the guy that deals in finding homes for people, also known as human trafficking. And Laera remembers that she's a sudden girl boss and goes off on Soren about how he's supposed to feel, as you do in a healthy relationship. But then she gets mad that the carpet doesn't match the drapes and rips her blonde wig off, so we understand she's a different lady now. Laera then becomes someone who watched way too much Walking Dead and pretends to be Negan. And after they find out the first place they went wasn't actually Kessler, she intimidates the guy and finds out that Kessler is conveniently on Onyx, along with Ackerson, Parangoski, Kai, the magic Forerunner well that the Chosen Quan needs, and everyone else who matters. They realize that the kid isn't in Illyria, and we've wasted a whole episode. Let's move on to Maki's arc, because her arc actually starts here with any kind of depth, if you can call it that. So Maki's arc pretty much makes no sense the entire time. We see her crying about Reach, as if she didn't know she was part of a group that was waging a jihad on humanity, and her entire goal, which she states, is to activate Halo and cleanse the galaxy and start over, because both humans and the Covenant suck. And we get this really stupid dynamic where McKee is ordering the Arbiter around, but then the elites are all like, you live because we let you. It doesn't even make sense why they keep threatening to kill her. As far as we know, the only other blessed one is her Spartan boyfriend. So if they kill her, they can't use any Forerunner shit, and this whole thing just makes no sense. And this plot, with pretty much no depth from her end, drags out for the rest of the season. Now that she has Cortana, they bond because they both seen Emperor Fanny's ass and won his dong. McKee freaks out about High Charity, even though they presumably can't harm her since she's the only blessed one they have, and they literally need her for their great journey. But whatever. Arbiter agrees to trust her because she says that she's located the Halo, like the Ohio State, and Cortana projects a hologram of it. She looks so insane that I'm not sure who would trust her when she looks like this, but whatever. And that's kind of it for her for this episode. And last but least, again, is Riz, and then she's gone. Riz finishes her arc, which is pretty much just a flat line where she kind of meanders from point A to B with no reason. She wakes up, realizes she's Forrest Gump, gets yelled at by Sovereign Derriere to stand up to reinforce that he's just a total asshole and a terrible leader. And for some reason, he's the protagonist we're supposed to root for. She says, "Eat shit, my biological clock is ticking, I'm going to play mama for the kids." And that's it. She just goes. And I said Riz was last, but we actually end on Kai because she's replacing Kurt in the dumbest way possible. And that's it for episode 5, the longest, most boring episode of the season. On to episode 6. Episode 6 is funny because the whole main cast is like, oh, thank God we had all these coincidences to end up on Onyx together, and then they all go their separate ways. So for this episode, I'm going to start with Perez because it's funny. So I Have No Training Perez is the best Spartan 3 after a week. Whatever budget they had, instead of using it for the main story, they used for their own original character, just like the fans asked for. They run a simulation test with random shots and no covenant because that's good training. And Kai is their leader now and essentially just narrates what they're doing but doesn't actually lead shit. Great arc for her. And as an aside, Perez literally just came from Reach and we see Kai feel guilty about Reach, so she should know that her former Spartan leader that she trusted was correct and not crazy. They run the simulation again. Perez figures out it's a suicide mission, and Kai seemingly knows as well, but trusts Ackerson enough that she's going to beat Jamal Cheek's ass later in this episode. So let's go to Lord Queef and Kai next. Joel Helix beats up a bunch of guys without killing them, lets himself get arrested. They don't shoot on sight. They arrest him and then decide to shoot on sight later, even though he's never been questioned. So pretty much he's just wearing plot armor for this episode to get from point A to B to C. We get a generic Captain America scene where Megan Rapinoe taunts Jimmy, and he says, "I'll never watch women's soccer no matter how mean you are to me." And then because they don't have him in handcuffs, they have him on leashes for some reason. He just whips everybody around, beats their asses. Wonderful security job at the top secret UNSC base on Onyx. And then he literally just wanders around the base unimpeded. Ackerson confirms the existence of Makee and the fact that Reach fell showed that John was telling the truth. So Kai says that she trusts him. And she's also supposed to be feeling guilty about Silver Team being dead, and then proceeds to kick the ever-living shit out of Jonas Swerve, again, when he was proven to be telling the truth about everything. And then despite all this guilt, she's going to prioritize the Spartan 3s later anyway. Great arc for her too. Everyone with Goldfish memory pretends that he didn't hold his own against Vanek and Riz last season when they were both in armor.
Serval's out of spec. Take out his knee. Riz, 6 o'clock.
So they try to justify this scene as he's just giving up because she has armor. So he lets Kai kick the shit out of him. The armor is really just whatever it needs to be. It's about as magical as Thor's Mjolnir. Cortana, because she's magic and can operate a UNSC base from a Covenant spaceship who knows how far away, realizes now is her chance to cuck Makee because she isn't around. So Cortana hopes that she can wake up Joel Radius with Morning Wood. I mean, she's honestly almost as magical as the Chosen Quan and literally runs the entire base from who knows where on this Covenant ship and guides him to Ackerson and his suit. Kai goes and argues with Ackerson and claims that she trusts Jace, even though she just fucking pummeled him to near death. Why'd she do that? Who knows? I guess it was allegedly an emotional scene. Let's move on to Quan's part. She just wanders off and falls into a Forerunner well, and luckily Halsey is just waiting at the bottom for her. Halsey and Miranda eventually find Quan, and of course, Miranda is smarter than Halsey and figuring out things that she couldn't, because fucking boomers, am I right? That's pretty much it for Quan this episode and Halsey. So let's go on to Parangoski. In this one, she continues being a bizarre character. Her cycle of stupidity continues, where she now says, "Oh, by the way, I'm the boss," as if everyone didn't already know that. And her genius remains unparalleled when she says that they need 1 million men to replace a single Spartan 2. Maybe you shouldn't have gaslit and tried to kill them repeatedly then, you fucking jackass.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
Wait till I get going. Where was I?
Moving on to Soren and Laera, who have hardly any time. They just walk into the Spartan 3 training area because their plan is to just grab Kessler and roll out. And then suddenly Soren decides to become the stereotype of a black father and wants to abandon his kid before Laera yells at him. Best thing she does all season. And the last one, but probably not the least, is the Arbiter. The Arbiter decides to trust Makee and leave High Charity and pisses off his crew. And now he has to defend his ship from mutiny, and Makee decides that her and Autocrat Tushy had the best timing in the world because they're about to grab the magical Forerunner artifact at the same time. And that's it for episode 6. Just a complete cluster. On to 7. Episode 7's a doozy, so we had to start with the MC for this one, which unfortunately either means main character or Master Cheeks because Master Chief is nowhere in sight. We start with another date on Halo with Job and Makee, where she says she loves footlong wieners, and he says that her clam is the only seafood that he'll eat. Good times. The Wi-Fi is so bad that the Forerunner Skype call drops, and the magical device knocks out only who it needs to, on his end but not hers for some reason. He has a great line too where he blames her for Reach, and she says that's war, as if it's not her side that wants to do the genocide. Whatever.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
He wanders around the base, and Megan Rapinoe goes to shoot Judah Incurvation, but her soldiers are like, oh fuck, he's wearing plot armor, and women's soccer still sucks balls, so they don't do it. And then Kai knocks her out, and she just doesn't show up again. Satisfactory antagonist right there. Jethro Contour immediately goes back on his supposed development and tells Kai, yeah, it sucks, but sacrifices had to be made. He gets his armor, and we get hero music, as he becomes full-blown Master Cheeks, with no helmet still. The scorned lover, Perez, is reunited with Jordan Loop, and inspires him to save people instead of prioritizing the mission, and gives him his coin back, which is how he makes all decisions or something. He realizes that he doesn't want her to die, because when he goes to the Halo ring with Makee and Cortana, he's going to need a side piece and someone to help repopulate the ring faster. And that's it for him for this episode. Let's move on to Parangoski and Ackerson, since they're pretty much tied together in this one. This may be the dumbest episode for Parangoski, which is pretty impressive since I think I've said it every episode. Parangoski tells Ackerson to his face that she's going to throw him under the bus. You know, as all good undercover spies who are about to betray somebody do. They give him fair warning. The big fleet is coming for Onyx, you know, so we end up with an identical situation to Reach, which they just totally abandoned. And Parangoski just sends Condors to die one after another against the Covenant fleet. Great use of resources and tactics. Thank God they didn't try to defend Reach. And here we get what I would argue is the dumbest thing in the show, where Ackerson runs the simulation for this spike they have to blow up a Covenant ship. The spike is supposed to incinerate the solar system, including Halo, but then later on Ackerson specifically says it has a 1,000,000-mile radius. Just to give everyone some perspective, our moon is 240,000 miles away. These idiots wanted to create a doomsday device and don't even understand scale. And they're so fucking retarded they created a doomsday device.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
That's mainly it for Ackerson for this one, and Parangoski. Let's move on to Makee. Makee manages to outrun the Sangheili priest without armor, and then kills him. So again, how useful is the armor really? Arbiter fought off the infidels, and Makee puts the mark of shame on herself to join him. And that's it for this one for her. Let's go to the Miranda, Halsey, Obi-Kwan plot, which is hilarious. Halsey and Miranda have been working on this for years, and Halsey's been working on it literally since before Miranda was born, apparently. And Kwan figures it out in about 5 minutes because she's magic. What's even funnier is why did the Forerunner set this door up this way? They get the door open, walk into the lab, and then the lab collapses in on itself and destroys itself. Like, what kind of wannabe Indiana Jones shit is this? If the Forerunners didn't want the lab open, just blow it up yourselves. And this massive series of coincidences is what causes the flood to be let loose. So ridiculous to just waste a massive twist like that. Halsey and Miranda are talking. Miranda pops open the flood USB, blows a load in her pants.
Oh.
Halsey is suddenly Batman and just vanishes to the command center. And while in the command center next episode, she pretty much has to look right at the camera and tell the audience, I'm not arrested because this show doesn't make any sense, but it's cool, don't worry about it. Parangoski is mad at Ackerson for doing his job and knowing what the spike does. Another win for Parangoski. So he gets arrested for this. I'm going to go on to Soren and Laera because they don't have much time this one. Soren suddenly reminisces about being a child soldier. And Laera is like, hey, you retard, that's our son. Best point she's made all season. Soren uses his masturbation arm to beat up the guards and protect his son. But Laera and Kessler get arrested and go to jail. I guess he just walks away from the secret military base. These two and Ackerson are the only motherfuckers dumb enough to let the UNSC actually arrest them, because everyone else in the show is just invincible. Moving on to Perez last. She doesn't do much this episode either. She has to calm down the more experienced Spartan 3s because one is crying. And like I mentioned before, she's now an inspiration for John because Quan and Perez are his motivations. Halsey says outright that Quan motivated John to change. He doesn't really seem to have his own motivation beyond uncontrollable rage, unless it comes from Quan, Perez, or McKee. Wonderful. The episode ends and we actually see Halo. Took 16 episodes, but there it is. The incompetence to make the Halo ring a short slip space jump away, and the entire Covenant fleet is there, but they're not actually trying to land on their holy ring. They just chill in space fighting humans. They actually mentioned in the show that they scanned a gravitational anomaly in this area, and I guess they just never bothered to look through a fucking telescope at it, or send anyone to go check it out. Insane. Anyway, we're on to the finale. Episode 8 is the equivalent of when you've had too much to drink, you have sex for like an hour, can't bust a nut because you're too drunk, and then just give up and go to sleep tired.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
I'm saving Cheeks for last this episode, since he's the one who ends the season. We can start with the Quan, Soren, Kessler, Laera, Ackerson part. We get a person who's presumably a PhD in biology, professional lab researcher, and too dumb to not spread the flood virus with some cringe-ass pop song. And if you're a show-only person, I guess you just think there's zombies in Halo now. Obi-Quan's force sensitivity grows stronger, and she can sense the flood and shit with Soren, so she goes to help rescue Laera and Kessler, and for some unknown reason, Ackerson. You know, the guy who wanted to kill the Spartans, abandon Reach, and kidnapped Kessler for his program to make him into a Spartan 3 in the first place. Obviously worth saving. Even here, the way that he says hi to Laera and Kessler, he just looks evil as shit and villainous. Soren and Quan have no real reaction to all these people that are frozen, even though it's weird as shit. And they kill some extras from the Last of Us TV show and head on out. Obi-Quan is surrounded by the flood zombies, but she's grown strong in the Force and is now a Jedi Master, so the old lady is able to hold them back or something. It's not really clear. They're going to escape, Laera stays behind because she's infected, and everyone clapped because this death is a happy moment for the series instead of a sad one. Great writing. The flood runs wild in the command center, and I guess they didn't have the budget because Parangoski just kind of gets dry humped to death. Anyway, Halsey escapes, she's infected, Miranda puts her in cryo, and Miranda is now alone surrounded by flood, but says she'll cure the flood, which I have no doubt that she will if there's a season 3. I'm also assuming she'll off-screen teleport to escape the situation. We see that spores infect everyone but our main characters. I guess their plot armor is also effective against disease, and I guess that's why they're the only ones who are alright. Let's move on to Kai and Perez next, since they're kind of tied together. Just like they practiced in the simulations, only Kai, Perez, and the chick whose name I can't be bothered to remember make it to the ship. They make it to the command center, but they're kind of stuck, and Perez is wounded. So Jericho Meniscus flips his coin and goes to save Kai and Perez because he wants more bitches for his space equivalent of Noah's Ark. This scene is also funny because Parangoski must be senile. She tries to start to give him orders again, and then has surprise Pikachu face when he says eat shit. I think we get more suit time with Perez and Kai than we do with him as they fight the Covenant, and she uses double needlers. He does finally show up and act like John Halo, killing Covenant, saving Spartans, and completing missions. Kai says that she'll stay behind for the obviously predictable self-sacrifice, with a horrible one-liner of this is gonna hurt. And it's not even actually a self-sacrifice, because apparently her armor is invincible, and it's really a matter of whether or not her contract gets renewed if she's alive or dead. She doesn't even use the spike so that they can use it next season to blow up Halo if the show gets renewed. Somehow crashing 2 ships together in a relatively small explosion turns the tide of the battle.
Alrighty then.
Perez lives, and her arc just kind of ends as Kai explodes, but not really. So let's get on to the main man and his wife. McKee destroys Cortana's chip because she doesn't want mating competition on Halo, and her ship is getting shot at by the Covenant, even though she is the blessed one that they need to get to Halo to start the fucking great journey. Holy shit, this plotline is stupid. We get a really weird flash forward of Sultan Gluteus Maximus talking to a really bored sounding person that's actually supposed to be a monitor. And at the end, his helmet is half broken. So the next season, he has an excuse to not wear it, if the show gets to season 3. So after the stuff that I already covered where he saves his 2 side pieces, Kai and Perez, we get more world-breaking retardation, where the Spartan's little suit propeller flies faster than Covenant ships, because Homeboy here catches up to McKee's ship in like no time in order to get Cortana back. By the way, his relationship with Cortana at this point is that he hated her, didn't trust her. Cortana watched him bone McKee. He was sad and simped over digital strippers who looked like her. She woke him up and helped him get his suit back, and now he desperately needs her. Anyway, he magically catches up to the ship. Halsey openly defies Parangoski, which I guess she's just cool with now, and Chief sneaks onto the ship. He punches the keyboard the way that I want to punch my TV after trying to play the Gears of War 3 boss on Insanity by myself, and Cortana is magically inside his suit or something. She pretty much has no rules. Cortana says, "Hey, we're gonna die, dumbass. It's a crashing ship," and starts counting down to their death. But John's like, "Cortana, you don't know everything. I've got on my plot armor." So of course they crash the ship and he just walks it off. McKee says that she wants to ring in the divorce, and after Jared Coyle throws a tantrum because she took his virginity, he has to fight the Arbiter for his honor and get his woman back. They duel with swords, and it's kind of hilarious because the Arbiter literally just repeatedly lets him live. Like in this shot right here, you can see he tossed his sword away while Chief is laying there, and instead he just punches his helmet over and over instead of just running him through with a sword. I feel like you can almost hear Arby sigh as he read the script. There's also a really funny little thing right here in this shot where some plasma sword like drips off onto the Mjolnir and it's damaged. And this is like 15 minutes after Kai just crashed 2 Covenant ships into each other and her armor is unscathed. Awesome. Eventually, because he keeps letting him live, Arby dies and McKee says that she's going to go to the divorce lawyer known as the Monitor. And if she wins her case, she's going to genocide the entire galaxy and force him to repopulate it with her. Joaquin is like, "I'm tired of sticking my dick in crazy," but ignores the threat and just lets her walk away. And then he also goes to speak to divorce mediator Guilty Spark. We get a super meta line here about how people stole his armor and bent it to their own purpose. It feels like the creators are trying to say fuck you to the audience just one more time. But there you have it. This is an exhibition in bad writing, and it took a big steamy dump on the fans, Vince McMahon style. I guess we can all rejoice and pray the shit gets canceled before they get renewed. And if they get renewed, I'm sure they'll find an excuse to get off Halo and kill the Flood in like 2 episodes because they don't have the budget. And what they really want to get back to is the CW level human drama that everyone loves. Bravo. So that's my season plot review / summary for Halo Season 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's pretty evident that if you actually hear all the details at once, even though at once is still like an hour because there's so much shit going on, while simultaneously nothing happens, that you can really understand just how absurd the story is, and the quality is not an improvement from Season 1 in any meaningful way.
And if you're here, still like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.